This second part of our learning series will discuss accelerated learning more deeply, focusing on how specialized instruction for students with disabilities should be dealt with in the context of recovery planning. So why is specialized instruction so important right now? Essentially, recovery, when it comes to accelerated learning, requires a focused, organized, and systematic approach to interrupted instruction. We're using the term interrupted instruction rather than the concept of learning loss because interrupted instruction puts the onus on the adults in the system to adjust for the fact that the school buildings were closed, as opposed to learning loss, which seems to put the onus on the student to be responsible for what was lost during the year. We know that interrupted instruction must be swiftly addressed, or else we're going to be dealing with this challenge for years to come. If students fell behind and learning is not accelerated, essentially we're going to have a generation of students that's behind in their learning outcomes. So this is something that really needs to be addressed, and especially because, as we mentioned before, the students who are now potentially furthest behind are the students who are furthest away from opportunity to begin with. So this is a really important piece of the puzzle for reducing gaps and ensuring equity. We know that there's many priorities involved in recovery. First and foremost, safety, student and staff well-being. We have a lot of educators and a lot of students who are working at sort of half capacity because of trauma that they've experienced over the last year. And then perhaps most importantly, the learning acceleration piece. So what is accelerated learning? Well, if we take the approach of we need to do remedial learning, which is basically a catch up on what you've missed approach, we know that this could actually worsen existing educational inequities. Because what it does is it basically says a student for whom they don't have the knowledge that they need to access grade level content, they're going to actually get lower level content, which doesn't actually, it may bring them up to where they need to be, but at the same time, other students are continuing to learn. So that student who's receiving remedial learning will always be behind. On the other hand, accelerated learning places unfinished learning in the context of new learning. So you're integrating both new information and the needed prior knowledge at the same time, which is better suited to support all students to recover from the interrupted instruction, because all students experienced this interrupted instruction. A note about the accelerated learning approach, which is to say that accelerated learning comes hand in hand with high quality assessments, because it's really critical that schools and educators know exactly where students are and that they're monitoring their progress along the way so that they can design tailored interventions to each student's need. So special education in the context of accelerated learning, now we're getting into the good stuff. So essentially, schools need to determine how to continue offering robust special education services in the context of accelerated learning. And essentially, the default is the same approach as before. If a student required special education supports in the classroom, whether it was a virtual classroom or an in-person classroom, those supports are likely going to be an essential component to consider when you're designing accelerated instruction opportunities as well. We're going to go into this in a little bit more depth in some subsequent lessons, but I did just want to point out that accelerated learning does require that an educator consider the special education needs of the student in designing the approach. So I'm going to try to use an analogy to explain what we're talking about here with recovery. So assume we are on the recovery train and the school is actually the track. So here we've got a track. Then we have the train, and the train is COVID recovery, all of the things that the school needs to do in order to recover from interrupted instruction. So along the way, there are environmental factors, things that are sort of outside of the control of the school, health factors, safety factors, other factors that might pop up along the way. There are things that are really important that need to be planned for, but they're not they're external environmental factors that come along this journey that we need to address. And then within the train, each car is essentially a different factor of what needs to happen for recovery. So we have operations considerations, facilities considerations, how far apart kids are going to be, how you're going to get cleanliness happening, wellness, as we talked about before, right? We've got a lot of folks who have experienced trauma, which will impact their readiness to learn or teach, as the case may be. And then we have the engine, the instruction, the accelerated learning that's moving the entire train forward. So within this accelerated instruction, we have curriculum interventions for all students. We have the specialized instruction for students with disabilities. We have related services. Everything that makes this train move is going to be considered part of planning for accelerated learning. And finally, we have our destination. It's always important to remember where we're going. And in this case, we are trying to make sure that we are bringing students back to a place where they would have been had we not had the interrupted instruction.